What's going on, Latin Wealth family? Welcome to another episode to the Latin Wealth Podcast. And we have another guest on the podcast today that I'm extremely excited about. And I think a lot of you guys out there should definitely pull out your pens and your notepads for this one, because a little bit about our guest. Our guest today is one of the first Latina-owned food and beverage companies to raise over $1 million. And there's not many Latinas out here that are really hitting that milestone. And to put that in perspective, there's only been 90 Latinas to do that ever in history, which is crazy. When I found that out, it's absolutely insane. And this company has grown pretty quickly. They've reached over 1,000 doors with using $0 in marketing budget. That was probably about a year ago. I'm sure they've reached a lot more doors now. So today we've having the co-founder of Agua Bonita on the podcast, which is a Latina-owned company that makes 100% real fruit agua frescas, out of reuse produce. Welcome the owner, Kayla, to the podcast. How you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm super excited to chat with you today just about everything. We have definitely grown a lot from even just a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I know some of some of these stats that I looked up and found. These are from like conversations and articles from about a year ago. So I'm sure she's had some updated information since then. But one of the things that, before we jump too deep into it, one of the things I'm curious about is, I know your headquarters is in Central California. Now, I grew up in Northern California and also lived in Southern California. So anytime we just driving through Central California, we don't ever stop. You know what I'm saying? So I'm curious, is that where your family's from? Was this a strategic move to have your headquarters in Central California? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, no one ever really stops here because it's like I always say, like, it's not like the sexy tech of the Bay, and it's
Yeah.
not like the sexy people of the South. It's just like all of this ag land. But my family is from here. So a couple generations ago, my family immigrated from Mexico to Texas, and then they followed the migrant farm work, which led them to Central California. So like I
Mhm.
said, it's a lot of like orchards and dairies and things like that. And so wherever there's fruit on a vine, someone needs to pick it, and it's
Mhm.
often Hispanic laborers. And so
Mhm.
that's how my family settled here. And when I started the company, it was mid-pandemic, so
Mhm.
no one was moving around too much of
Yeah.
anywhere. And it's been strategic, I would say, a little bit to stay here for as long as we have. But it's nice,
Mhm.
it lends itself to a lot of our business success.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Before we get into the pandemic and you starting the business, I'm curious about your upbringing and living in Central California. Did you guys ever visit, Southern, Northern California? Did you guys just stick around that area? And if you did visit, what did you think of it? I always tell people, if you've been to California, if you live there, the North and the South is like two completely different states. And in fact,
Yeah.
California can be like three different states if you cut it up. But
Yeah.
yeah, talk to us about your upbringing in Central California.
Yeah, so I live in a really small town, like the kind of town that, for a long while only had like one or two high schools, we still only have a couple high schools. And it's like one of those places where everyone really knows each other, which is like for better or for worse. So um, I actually like kind of hated it when I was younger,
Mhm.
because just everyone knew everyone, and it just
Yeah, yeah.
like felt like repetitive a little bit. And so when I graduated high school, I was like 17, 18. I moved to New York City to go to school. And so that's where I started my career too, working in just like food and beverage and sales and marketing. So I actually moved around quite a bit. And so when I first came back to California, I lived in Southern California. I have some family in the Bay Area, so I'd go up to
Mhm.
Northern California. But so I've been in big cities for a good while. I like in New York.
Mhm.
I lived in New York for 5 years. Um, and I just wanted that because it was so different from what I grew
Mhm.
up having. But now that I'm older and I moved back just a little bit before the pandemic
Mm.
because my grandparents were getting
Mhm.
older and, people start getting sick and stuff. So it was nice being back around family when I hadn't been around them for, 8 years or so.
Yeah,
Um,
love
so
that.
yeah, yeah.
So, talk to me, usually I ask people, like, you moving to a big city, what did you learn? What did the big city teach you, right? But for you, I'm curious, since you moved back, what did you learn moving back to your hometown, moving back to where your family's at? What are some things that you learned in the process?
I think it's really just about the mindset. I think like when you experience a bigger city and like the hustle and bustle of that and just like the cultures of those big cities, that's not
Mhm.
something that like ever leaves you. And it gives you a way of thinking about how other people live and how other people do things, um, that has really like influenced some of the
Mhm.
decisions that we've made with my business, right? So I come back and I know that it's a good business decision. The cost of living here is a little bit lower. We source fruit
Mhm.
locally,
That's
and
awesome.
this the local Central Valley has a lot to do with like just the inspiration of our entire company, even being a company. But
Mhm.
we start structuring it with the mindset of like, okay, but how do we make this appealing for people in LA and people in New York? And, just it just
Mhm.
broadens your horizons on how I think that you operate from a mindset point of view.
No, I love that for sure. So fast forward a little bit to 2020.
Mhm.
Here comes a time that nobody knows about. The pandemic hits, and what I love about a good pandemic story like your guys is like you took an opportunity of uncertainties, and you didn't know nobody knew what was gonna happen, right? And how long we were gonna be locked down, and you decided to launch a beverage company. Walk us through that process. What made you want to do that? Like talk to us about the courage that it took for you to do that. I mean, that's amazing. You know what I'm saying? To step out on faith like that, to do that.
Thank you. Well, yeah, right before the pandemic, I had been working for Coca-Cola for a while, and that's where I learned like the business of beverage. But I also realized that like you could have an idea at a big corporation like that and just like never see it come to life.
Mhm.
And I also wanted to help smaller businesses, with what I had learned on the corporate side. So I started being a consultant for food and beverage startups. And that's what I was doing when the pandemic rolled into town. And I think like that experience of being a consultant taught me that behind the scenes at a lot of startups, like it's just crazy. Like, it's not
Mhm.
always as zipped up as you might think it is from
Yeah.
an outsider's perspective. So it gave me the confidence that like, oh, I could do something like this if I really wanted to. And then the pandemic rolled into town. My clients that I was working for shut down, and I just had more time on my hands that I had been used to in all the previous years. And so I took it as we joke and say, like, when life gives you lemons, make aguas frescas,
Mhm.
because we took it as an opportunity to like create something that I just really wanted to see exist.
Mhm.
I wanted it to be a reflection of myself and my family and my culture and just see how far I could get with it. And even if it didn't work out, it didn't matter because there's a lot of things not working out for a lot of people. So
Mhm.
like what did I have to lose? Even if it didn't work out, I would still be on the same level playing field as everyone else. So
I love
I
that.
think the only thing that I would lose is not taking the opportunity to do it.
No, I love that perspective. So did you have this idea working at Coca-Cola?
No, I
Okay,
actually didn't have this idea until really well into the pandemic.
got you.
Few months in, my mother-in-law, she was home from Mexico, and she would make us aguas frescas like every single day.
Mhm.
And we'd make them a lot in our home. And growing up, I always had aguas frescas. Like my grandpa would bring home fruit from the fields and make aguas frescas. And so when my mother-in-law was home, it just really reminded me of like, wow, I just wish I could have this all the time.
Mhm.
And reminded me of my grandpa and my childhood. And then I was like, wait, this actually doesn't really exist in the commercial format
Mhm.
that I wish that it did. And why doesn't it? Like people love aguas frescas, you know what I mean? And that was really when like the inspiration struck of like, okay, like use your time and work on that.
Mhm. No, I love that. So the idea comes, you have the time to work on it. What is like what's the first step to go into it? Like, and what is your vision of the company? Did you envision it to be in over 1,000 doors initially, or is it just like something that you wanted to try to do? What was your vision like? And what were like the first couple of steps to just to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I think initially you really have to sit down and think about the like product market fit. And,
Hmm.
you might think that it's a great idea, but like, is there legs for widespread adoption? And I think, kind of just doing some market research kind of helps either solidify that or not. And then with beverage in particular, there's a lot of technical things. Like you can't just make something in your kitchen and then sell it to people.
Mm,
Like you really have to like get a food scientist, get a formulation team, and that stuff costs money, you know what I mean? So
mm,
it's like you also have to have a little bit of risk tolerance to like, okay, am I willing to bet my life savings that this will work out? I I was willing to bet that, you know what I mean? But it was just because I felt really convicted.
mhm,
And then I think you just have to realize that like it takes time. Like it's not going to happen overnight no matter how quickly you're working on something. And yeah, like that growth, getting those thousands doors and stuff like that, it's just not going to come right away.
mhm.
So be realistic with yourself about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, talk to us about these food scientists. Anybody out there that's looking to start their own beverage or food company, is that the step they have to go through? They have to go through a food scientist, and what does that process look like? Or, what exactly are they doing?
Yeah, you're gonna have to find a formulation team that has a food scientist on staff, or like uh, a food scientist that just does consulting. But it'll depend on, what your product is and the parameters with which you can
Mhm,
produce it, because not everything is made on the same type of machinery, and different packaging really dictates like how you can make things, right? So like I chose an aluminum can because aluminum is infinitely recyclable and
mm,
just the most likely to be recycled. But in all honesty, like picking a plastic bottle would have been way easier,
way
um,
easier.
just because of the process to make them. But you can't really understand the process that it'll take to make your drink until you talk to a food scientist. They
Mm,
might tell you like, oh yeah, that great thing that you want to put in a wine bottle, not gonna happen. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like, so
interesting.
definitely the first step.
But yeah, that I love that. So, I'd love for you to talk about the testing process. Like, right, you kind of mentioned it. Is there people out there that are willing to buy the product and whatnot? Does it even taste good? Do people think it tastes good? 'Cause I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we go with what we think is right when we need to
Mhm.
go with what the consumer and what the customer wants, right? And what the market is looking for. So I would love for you to break down that process of you just testing out your product. Who are you testing it out on? Were you sending it to people? I'm curious how you were collecting these data points to figure out like, is this the one to sell?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really fine line to walk and a balancing act. When we started, I worked with a team that had, certain attributes that they wanted to hit, right? Like no added sugar,
Mm,
this many calories or less, blah, 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 blah. But when you're using real fruit and real ingredients and trying to achieve a taste profile that like people are already somewhat familiar with, sometimes those things just don't align. Like it might sound great on paper to be all those things,
mhm.
but your drink might be nasty. And there was, like some stuff that we put out that did not taste good, and
Mm.
it took
So
like
you actually, not to cut you off, you actually sold it, like you put it out?
yeah, yeah, and I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
that's part of the process too, is like giving away samples for free just to
Mm,
get feedback, you know what I mean? I think that was like a big part of things, and like taste is so personal for
Mhm,
every person. So I think like, you're always going to get those people that are like, "Oh, this is great," or "This is terrible," and just like trying to like deduce like, okay, who is my customer and what do they care about the most,
mhm,
and like make something for them, because if your scope is too wide, you're never going to get a consensus.
mhm,
And if you're just trying to like hit a bunch of like
mm,
marketing buzzwords, like that's also not
mm,
going to work. So I think there's a fine line between producing something that like is really authentic to you, but is also made with like your consumer in mind. And we're
yeah,
still like fine tuning things. I think our next production, which will hopefully be like our last golden recipes, forever and
mhm,
ever. But that took us like 2.5 years to even
mm.
to get there, and lots of testing and lots of feedback. And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, so how much feedback or how much input do you have on the taste of your product, of your own products, right? Like I said, we may think it tastes phenomenal, but the masses says this ain't it. So how much of a impact do you have on the tasting process and all that?
Um, I mean, I would say with our newest production coming out, um, that is definitely influenced by my tastes.
Gotcha.
With a lot of the feedback that I've gathered throughout the years in mind, I would say like when we started the company, that really was not a lot of my taste infused in that. It was more of like, okay, just trying to mold it into something that we thought
Mhm.
other people would like. So I think it just like develops over time.
Yeah.
Um, and like I am a consumer, like a target consumer of our brand, but not every founder is a target consumer of their own brand.
Mm, interesting.
So I think that that's like important to realize too, is like in this case, I am, the people that I talk to. And I think that's been part of our success is like I'm building a community of people that care about the things that I also care about. But that's not true for every founder and every brand.
I love that. So like the whole target consumer, it's obviously very important because, for instance, one thing that I drink all the time is coconut water.
Hmm.
I try to drink it for the health benefits and whatnot. And for me, I mean, I think it tastes phenomenal, but for someone like my wife who hates coconut, it's not
Hmm.
gonna work out for her. But I love that you're like, look, we're really trying to figure out who our target customer is and cater towards them. So for you guys, who is that target customer and like what's that avatar? What do they look like? Maybe where do they live as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple. Without like getting too in the weeds about it, I think
Hmm.
our consumer is typically younger, right? Like, I don't imagine I will ever convince or convert like my grandma or my mother-in-law to start buying prepackaged aguas frescas, right? They're just gonna make
Yeah,
their
right,
own,
right. They're
like,
gonna make it at the house.
like, yeah, they're just like, what it like, no, So like that is obviously not our target consumer. But like me and my partner, right? Like we are a lot younger and like we value convenience and we can't have 80 grams of sugar per serving,
Hmm.
so like we are a part of that kind of target consumer. um, One misconception that we get all the time is that like we are a Latino brand for Latinos and like that's it,
Hmm.
and that's not true. Like
Right, right.
a big portion of our consumer base is, but there's also people from other backgrounds that just like love Mexican food, right? Like
Mhm.
I would say like tacos are not just for Mexicans, right? Like everyone
Everybody,
loves
yeah.
tacos, right? So it's that same idea that there's other people from different backgrounds that maybe just like the flavor profiles or they want to try something from a different culture, or they don't like coconut water but they want to try something like, oh, pineapple cucumber, but I can still get all the same health benefits. Like, yeah, let me
Mhm.
try it. You know what I mean? So
Mm,
it looks
mm.
different
I love that.
depending on where we're at.
Love that, love that. Switching gears a little bit, I would love to talk about raising funds and pitching a little bit if we can.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I was reading and listening to a couple of your interviews. You actually won every single one of your pitch competitions that you've ever been in, which is amazing. It's great. That's awesome. You know what I'm
It's
saying?
crazy. It's
Yeah,
crazy to hear someone else say it. Yeah.
yeah. It's like you like Michael Jordan with 6 rings right now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, but I love, but what I love is a gentleman asked you like, what basically what's the secret sauce? Like, how'd you do it? And I love your answer. You contribute a lot of your, obviously all the wins to the success of your story, the brand story, and how relatable it is to people. And obviously that you guys also have a very unique product in the marketplace. I would love for you to touch more about the pitch competition, maybe give some people out there some advice, you know, where are these competitions at? How can they
Mhm.
pitch themselves? And, you know, maybe just like a rough structure to help, you know, our people, you know, get funding as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's sort of like three things I keep in mind anytime that I go in to pitch. Um, One is really, yeah, your story, right? So, like my story, I grew up in a small town, Central California, like migrant farm working family. My grandpa would bring home fruit and make aguas frescas. He just couldn't stand to let it go to waste. It'd be super ripe, and instead of throwing away, he's like, I'm gonna put some use to it. Now that's what my company does. We take upcycled fruit, make aguas frescas, don't let it go to waste, and we make some fun flavors. You know, we have mango habanero, watermelon chile, you know, very cultural staples, right? It is a relatable story because there's a lot of people that can see themselves in that, right? Like their
Mhm.
family did the same thing, or they came from a migrant farm working family. So I think your story is always important because that's where the audience is going to draw a connection to. But I think being aware of who your audience is helps you highlight different parts of your
Mm,
story that matter, right? Like if I'm
love that.
talking to, you know, a group of consumers, then the origin story might be much more important. But if I'm talking to a group of investors, it
Mhm.
might be more important to talk about, you know, the wins that we're having, or like
Numbers.
how this product fills a need in the marketplace, right? So
Mm,
like knowing who your audience is always gonna like structure how you tell your story.
that's
And
good.
yeah, so I would say those are the two things, like you know your story and then know your audience so that way you know what parts of your story to tell. And then the third thing is really just like practicing timing. Um, you really only get so much time, especially in like pitch competitions. It's usually like 3 minutes or less to
Mm,
say everything that you want to say.
mm,
And you don't want to like leave off without kind of like hitting home, you know, like that big finishing portion, right? So like practice your timing because the more and more you practice it, you'll understand like, oh, that resonated with people, that didn't. Like just leave it and keep going. Um, and I think those three things are really the only things that I took into every pitch competition,
mhm,
and have served me well enough was just like,
mm,
what's my story? What does the audience care about in my story? And how succinctly can I tell them these things?
mm. And how, I mean, that's phenomenal, but how important is like tone and the way you deliver the story? Is that important to you? You
Yeah,
take that in consideration? Okay.
yeah, it is, you know, but I have always pitched how I talk. So
Mhm,
like the same pitch that you get on the stage is the same like conversation that you're going to get from me off
mm.
stage, you know.
It's who
And
you
I think
are.
that's important, because people want to talk to a real person. They want to
Mhm.
see a real person, you know. So don't, if you don't know what certain words mean, don't use those words, you know what I mean? Because then people are going to ask you about it, you
Yeah,
know?
ask you, yeah.
So, yeah, and then what are you going to say? Like, you know what I mean? So, and like,
Yeah, I
I mean,
love that.
I put some humor in some of my pitches too, you know, just depending on the
Mhm,
audience. But I think it's just like very important to be your authentic self,
mhm.
you know, as much as you can. So, yeah, tone is important. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Are most of your were most of your pitches in person? Were they virtual? And are you still like actively looking for to pitch in more competition?
Yeah, so most of my pitches were virtual because a lot of it was still during the pandemic. Though I did do a few towards the end that were in person. Um, and nowadays I don't do too much like public pitching in terms of like
Mhm.
chasing grant money. Although I have a couple big ones coming up later this year. I can't share just yet, but
Mhm.
um, yeah. So I since we are kind of up and running a little bit more, I spend more of my time pitching to investors to get
Mhm.
capital versus grant competitions. But
Yeah.
grants are always great. I mean, it's free money. It's free money. You don't have to give up any part of your business. You can
Yeah.
use it how you want. Like it's a really good starting point for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, and so we're gonna touch on fundraising in a second, but I want to hit on like where were you looking to find these pitch competitions at? Like, if someone's out there listening, they're like, obviously the money's out there, but where are some practical places people can go?
Yeah, anywhere anywhere and everywhere. Like, if
Mm,
you're on Instagram all the time, like, start looking up pitch competitions. Like, like, your algorithm will tailor to what you're looking for, you
what
know?
you
So if
want?
you're
Yeah.
spending hours on Instagram, start looking up grants, start looking up pitch competitions, start following, like, community funds, stuff like that, you know what I mean? I spent a lot of my time on Instagram finding, pitch competitions,
Hmm.
and then also just, like, Googling things, right? Like,
Hmm.
the power of Google is right
Endless.
there at everyone's fingertips. Like, I would stay up late at night just Googling stuff, and a lot of the pitch competitions are like annual, right? So like they happen
Mm,
every year. Put it on your calendar so you know when to submit. And then just the more and more you get plugged in with communities that are like giving back, right?
mhm.
The more and more you'll see those opportunities start to pop up. But I mean, it wasn't anything special.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can only imagine as well. LinkedIn would probably be a great
Oh,
place
oh
where
yeah.
people are business minded. There's groups in there. It would be a great place to look for pitch competitions as well.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, so shifting gears a little bit, I'd love for you to break down a little bit of the difference between, just pitching grants and competition, those type of competition to actually raising capital and raising funds. Love for you to break down that difference and, what's the process? Like, when should somebody look to raise funds for their company?
Um, yeah, I mean that looks different for everyone, and I think it depends on like what your goals are. Like if
Hmm.
your goals are like aggressive growth and you know that you're in a capital intensive industry, like you're probably gonna have to raise money a lot sooner than some other folks, right? And I think that when it comes to starting to fundraise, that pitch looks a lot different because there's a lot more analytical aspects that go into it, right?
Mm,
Like really painting the big picture for people of what the opportunity is, not just because you feel like it's a good one and you have a good product, right? You have to show them like this is the data that the market says,
mhm,
and this is the size of the market opportunity. And like, this is where we fit in. And if I get this many openings and I can do that based on past performance, or I'm already doing that, if we have your support financially, this is where it can go. So I think it's a balancing act between like the big inspirational picture and then supporting it with like, but this is the
mhm,
numbers to back it up, and this is where we can go.
mhm. Absolutely. How important is it's just knowing your numbers as a company when you're pitching to investors?
It's super important, and
Mhm.
honestly, like it's an area of improvement that
Mm,
even I like am always trying to get better at. Like not everyone is going to be great at every part of their business, you know what I mean? But I think as a founder, like you really have to push yourself to be, especially when it comes to numbers.
mm,
Um, so if you're not that good at them, like you're gonna have to get
mm.
familiar with them, you
You
know what
gotta
I
work on it.
mean?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I love it. We can start wrapping this thing up a little bit. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about Agua Bonita. And I know you got some cans behind you. I'd love for you to talk about like the different ingredients you guys offer, maybe some of the health benefits, what makes it stand out from the other products on the market. I'd love for you to tap into that.
Yeah, so Agua Bonita, yeah, we have a few cans right here. This is one of our first ones. This is pineapple cucumber. Um, So we make, slightly sweet aguas frescas in really bold and fun flavors. And we have about 80% less sugar than traditional offerings, but still 100% of that flavor. And when I say like bold and fun, I mentioned earlier, like we have flavor profiles like mango habanero and watermelon
Mm,
chile, but then also some classics like pineapple and just sweet watermelon and agua de Jamaica. So
mhm,
we balance like that traditional cultural aspect and then the modern, more fun cultural aspect. Um, but yeah, it's really just about clean ingredients. We don't use anything artificial. We use real fruit, which is a big difference. And we use a lot of it. So
mm,
industry standard, like if you were to get something like a spindrift, and we're not sparkling by the way, but
mm.
spindrift has like 3 to 5% juice, right? And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, it's real fruit juice. Which is it is, you know what I mean? But we have like 30% real fruit juice. So it's not just
Mhm.
like a hint of flavor. It's like, okay,
It's
this
there.
is this is hidden it, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So um yeah, we just wanted to give as authentic an experience as we could, but in a modern way and have some fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And where can people buy the product at? Are you guys on Amazon yet? What stores are you guys in? What states?
Yeah, so, this time last year, we were getting ready to go into like 50 stores, all
Mhm.
in California. And right now, we're getting ready to go into almost 2,000 stores. So we've grown
Wow.
a lot in a short amount of time, but you'll be able to find us in just a couple months in Whole Foods all over the country, Targets all over California, and then 7-Elevens in select markets. And then if you're in like a Midwestern state or something like that, I would just always check like the local natural grocery
Mhm.
stores because we're in a lot of like
Mm.
natural accounts too. But Whole
Wow.
Foods, Target, and 7-Eleven are some of the more recognizable banners.
That's amazing. I'm out here in Dallas, Texas, so I'm gonna be looking around. See
Yeah,
if I can find
definitely
some.
go to Whole Foods.
Yeah.
We'll probably be in 7-Eleven in your neck of the woods. I was just in Dallas to visit 7-Eleven not that long ago. So
Oh,
yeah,
really? Awesome, awesome. Oh, because the headquarters is out here.
headquarters there.
Oh, yeah, it's right by the airport. That's funny. That's funny.
Oh,
Um, Kayla, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate the gems that you drop on this podcast. It really means the world to me, and I really want to like tip my hat to you because you're doing an amazing job creating a strong representation for our community, which is very much needed. And we created this platform to give people like you a voice, right? And so we can also support you as well. So with that being said, where can people reach out to you if they want to follow you, if they want to keep up with your company and so forth?
yeah, Instagram is great. It's at Drink Agua Bonita, so that's our company one. If you want to hit me up for anything, any questions, stuff like that, mine is so fresca, so clean. So
Hmm.
you can find me there. LinkedIn, I'm pretty active too, but I mean, we're really responsive across all platforms. You'll get a
Yeah.
real person, so just follow us, hit us up, and yeah, just keep up with us.
Yeah, and I'll link everything in the description of this podcast. Which, with that being said, you guys know, go ahead and follow us on Instagram at Latin Wealth. Share this podcast episode with one of your friends and family members. And with that being said, we'll catch you guys next week. Peace out.
Thanks.